Hi, I'm Mark Baber and I'm the Technical Marketing Manager here in the UK and Ireland for Sony's Photo Channel. Well, we've managed to get hold of the A7S Mark III a couple of weeks ago. It was an early prototype, so we had limited time with it, but we've learnt more about the menu system, the ergonomics, and about the concept of the camera as well. So let's have a look at the camera in more detail and let's see how the A7S Mark III can perform. So here it is, it's the new A7S Mark III. Now we've had a prototype a few weeks ago, so it certainly doesn't reflect the final cosmetic look or output of the camera. But early signs is a perfect video camera for content creators, product houses, freelancers, and certainly a superb stills camera for astro, low light gigs, that kind of thing. Now we know that the video market is growing, and with less people now on set, consumers I think are wanting to get that professional look and more flexibility. So we know that more and more users are moving from, say, smaller sensor cameras like Super 35 to full frame for quality images in a small body. So with 5 years of heritage of the A7S Mark II, it's clearly time for Sony to update basically the best image quality for professionals and alike in this new camera. So pretty much everything in the new A7S Mark III is new on this camera for Sony. So what are the key messages from this camera? Well, it has a 12.1 million pixel backside illuminated sensor, superb low light capabilities where the signal to noise ratio is clearly better than the Mark II and the read data much faster than previous. Therefore, bigger pixels and back illuminated structure is going to give you better noise management and low light ability. So it's got a brand new processor, it's the Bionz XR, and it's the heart and brain of this camera. It has double the readout speed over the Mark II and is 8 times faster than the Bionz X processor that you find in the A9 Mark II and also the A7R Mark IV. It has 15 stops of dynamic range, which of course gives you incredible detail regarding shadows and highlights. And for the first time in the alpha mirrorless cameras, it's got a full pixel readout in 4K 60p, 120p, 4K, it does have a slight crop. Included in the Full HD 240p mode, there is no audio, and the internal recording is for all modes at 422 10-bit colour sampling, and I'll cover that a bit later in the video. So from the video you can see that the camera now has an articulated screen. Now that's been recently introduced into the ZV-1, so it's very similar to that camera. The buttons are more prominent like the A7R Mark IV and the A9 Mark II. The feel and handling of the camera feels great, and I have to say where the thumb grip is, my hand sits really comfortably when I'm using it. There's an additional top plate wheel, as you can see, for the shutter and aperture, and the exposure compensation dial now is on the top of the camera. The record button is now firmly placed on the top of the camera with the C1 button in its old position. The side of the camera shows the card slot, which has a new mechanism to open and close. On the other side of the camera, the compartments are now a little bit more harder to open, which makes it a bit more solid, and there's definitely improvements over the sealing and the weather resistance. There's of course ports for headphone, microphone, and the HDMI port, which I'll cover later. The AF system is on-chip 759 phase detection points with 425 contrast AF. It now has real-time tracking in stills and video, along with touch tracking, and it can now boast a 30% improvement in eye autofocus capabilities over cameras using the Bionz X processor like the A9 Mark II, which is obviously very, very fast and responsive. It covers almost 100% of the sensor at 92% coverage and can focus down to EV-6. Now IAF also works in video, and I've got to say from testing it's really reliable and accurate and locks onto faces at different times really well. The inbuilt image stabilization has now been improved to 5.5 stops, and it now has a new heat dissipating structure within the magnesium alloy body. Now this gives an additional hour's worth of recording at 4K 60p. ISO can be extended from 80 to 409,600, with the best performing ISO, I have to say, around 640 ISO and 160 ISO in S-Log 3. I've only had the camera for a short amount of time, and I was really impressed with the field of view of the new QXGA electronic viewfinder. It has 9.44 million dot resolution, and the refresh rate was really good at 120 frames per second. Right, now we've got the camera in my hand, let's have a good look around it. This is a better view of the camera where you can see the newly positioned mode dials and the record button. When I open the card slots, you'll now see that it takes both the new CF Express Type A cards and also UHS 2 SD cards. The door is also new and it has a new mechanism that locks really well. And for the first time in an alpha mirrorless range, the A7S Mark III now has a fully articulated screen. Again, the design of this prototype is not final and doesn't represent the final samples released in the market for sale. Moving to the left side of the camera now, it has a full HDMI port, as well as the mic and headphone jack, micro USB and USB-C charging, which charges roughly 3 to 4 times faster than the A7S Mark II. The new QXGA 9.44 million dot resolution electronic viewfinder is really bright, it's sharp and has a 0.90 magnification with its new optics. Its field of view is 40 degrees and with a 25mm eye point. As well as the eye sensor, it now has a switchable viewer magnification for eyeglass wearers. And I've got to say, I was very impressed on how comfortable it was to view with its 120 frames per second refresh rate. Now let's have a look at the two products together, the A7S Mark II and the A7S Mark III. The A7S Mark III now weighs 699 grams versus 627 grams, and it's 129 by 97 by 70 millimeters versus the A7S Mark II 116.8, 68.6 and 38.1. The readout speed is double with the processor, now it's 8 times faster than previous models with the Bions X processor. The rolling shutter has been improved to around 3 times over the Mark II, with huge improvements in speed, focusing, reliability and accuracy over the previous model. But this of course has been a very significant improvement in the IAF technology, so the addition of animal IAF is found on the A7S Mark III, whereas it's not on the A7S Mark II. The Mark III can disperse the heat more effectively than the Mark II, so the camera can record for longer. And when using the CF Express Type A cards, the new A7S Mark III can shoot 10 frames per second in continuous mode, double what the Mark II could do with now a huge 1000 RAW shots uncompressed on the CF Express card. The file size management and computing power and processing time requirement of this camera is very efficient. As you can see from the following comparison, the A7S Mark III is bigger than the Mark II. The grip is larger to hold, the Z battery, which is double the capacity of the W battery, of course is going to give you more shots. It's taller, although not that much, with the EVF slightly longer due to the new optics used. You can see the new dials along the top that have been relocated and also the record button now in a key position. At the back of the camera, it's clear the whole setup, including the LCD screen, is very different to the Mark II. Custom buttons, articulating screen, joystick, thumb grip, top plate mode dials and buttons are more prominent to touch. The thickness of the camera is clear to see that it's deeper than the A7S II. The changes are much better with the addition of the full HDMI port and the LCD screen hinges. Now we paired the body with a lens and I've put the 16-35mm G Master on. And not forgetting, Sony now have 57 native E-mount lenses in the range and 37 of them are full frame lenses. It's also a one-mount system, which means if you're an amateur, an enthusiast, a professional or a content filmmaker, there's no need for adapters. And this is one of the biggest advantages using the E-mount system, as well as the cross-compatibility across full frame, APS-C, video lenses and bodies. You might have noticed that the A7S Mark III has a full-size HDMI instead of a micro HDMI port. Now this will make it a lot easier to connect to external monitors with full-size HDMI connections. We've also found out that the camera can now record in 16-bit RAW over HDMI to an external monitor or recorder. Now we don't have enough information to go into more detail here, but we hope that more information will be provided at a later stage. Here we've just demonstrated how easy it is to connect to an external monitor with a full HDMI. The camera now has a new multi-interface shoe for the shotgun microphone, the XLR K3M, and now can be set up for 4-channel 24-bit recording, alongside the ECM B1M for clearer sound. As well as the improvements in inbuilt image stabilization, there's now the ability to use the electronic stabilization in active mode. For movies, this does crop slightly in camera, and it is very similar to the technology found on the ZV-1. Along with the new digital audio interface and the CF Express Type A cards, the camera can now transfer data faster than using the FDP at 5 GHz Wi-Fi connection. The new creative modes now sees an additional 4 new presets added to the camera, bringing the total to 10. These include film light tone, instant camera tone, vivid tone, soft and high key. So there's 8 parameter image controls with saturation, contrast, shadow, highlight, fade, sharpness range and clarity. The new HEIF photo, which is high efficiency file format, is a compressed image file with extended color reproduction space. It gives you 10-bit color versus JPEG 8-bit color. So it gives you more editing flexibility and a smaller capacity of storage, but you retain the JPEG advantage. In the next section, we'll look at the new menu structure and the way that you can now navigate the menus with a touchscreen. So here we have a static background for the camera to focus on. Now bearing in mind we've been recording this video whilst on lockdown, so all the recording has taken place at home. This is the back of the camera switched on, and as you can see the camera is in airplane mode as the Wi-Fi on the camera has been switched off. It's not final, that's the reason why. The same display that can be found on previous cameras is the same as what you find on the A7S Mark III. The screen on this camera is 1.44 million dot resolution. Well, as you can see, the new menu system has been completely changed. The tabs are now down to the side of the camera and not along the top. Now as I go through the tabs you can see some familiar menu sections, but I've got to say that it's been made easier to navigate than previous menus. In stills you still have different selections to say to video, and when you switch to video mode using the dial on the top of the camera, then you get specific video functions. If you've noticed, the menu selections are also color coded to help with selection. And for the first time on the mirrorless alpha range, we've got a touchscreen menu. I'm going to go through the menus randomly, and I have to say it's very, very responsive. I feel this is a great introduction to the camera and will help navigate the menus easier. And with the new multi-interface audio, this demonstration shows the different audio monitoring selections you have based on what input the microphone is. Now let's get straight into video modes. What high-res content can this low-light run-and-gun camera create? Well, it can now shoot 4K in all frame rates, 30p, 60p and 120p. There's no pixel binning in all recording modes, and all modes can record in 422 10-bit color sampling. The recording times are as follows. Sony recommends the timescales. It's 30 minutes for 4K 120p, 60 minutes for 4K 60p, and no limit on 30p. 4K 120p is cropped 1.1 times. Full HD 240p is found via the S&Q mode. There is no crop in 4K 60p. 4K 120p is available at 280 megabits per second in long GOP and all interest, supporting low compression movie file recording, and records at 422 10-bit H.264. This is with full AF capabilities. 4K 60p is available at a manageable file size of 600 megabits per second with full pixel readout in all intra and long GOP. 4K 30p is similar, but with the megabits per second to be confirmed. Autofocus can be used in all video modes. The camera can also record 16-bit RAW via HDMI with more information to follow. It has an incredible 15 stops of dynamic range in S-Log3 and 14 stops in stills. The new codecs that are available are in H.265, which is XH-AVCHS, and also has 10-bit HLG or HDR. Let's now have a look at the in-camera profiles. Now there have been some changes with the new colour signs being applied to the S-Log3 profile. This matches the FX9 colour gamut. It also looks a lot cleaner at 6400 and beyond versus the Mark II. The Mark III can shoot 600 images with the use of the LCD monitor. You can also charge and power the camera via USB-C, which is around 3 to 4 times faster than the Mark II. The CF Express cards are Type A with information released at the same time of launch of the camera. So before I had to give the camera back, we tried to shoot some low-light footage in the garden, and here you can see the camera film in the fire pit. First up, let's look at the focus peaking in the menu. Finally, let's now have a look at the ISO performance of the camera. As it's a prototype, unfortunately I can't share any footage from the internal side of the camera, as this was not available at the time of recording. What I'm going to do now is go through each ISO to give you an idea of how well the ISO performs on this camera. And like I said, looking at 6400 and beyond, it looks really, really clean, right up to 32,000 and on.
So that's it, that's the A7S Mark III. I'd highly recommend it as a first-class video camera for filmmaking, vlogging and for low-light photography. You can buy the camera from Wilkinson's Cameras. Please visit their website for further information on purchasing. Their details are on the screen.